Okay, so Matthew 17, 24 through 27. After Jesus and his disciples arrived in Capernaum, the collectors of the 2 drachma temple tax came to Peter and asked, "Doesn't your teacher pay the temple tax?" "Yes, he does," he replied. When Peter came into the house, Jesus was the first to speak. "What do you think, Simon?" he asked. "From whom do the kings of the earth collect duty and taxes? From their own children or from others?" "From others," Peter answered. "Then the children are exempt," Jesus said to him. "But so that we may not cause offense, go to the lake and throw out your line. Take the first fish you catch. Open its mouth and you will find a 4 drachma coin. Take it and give it to them for my tax and yours." Okay, so this is kind of a cute story. If you like to fish, I don't fish as much as I did when I had a small son at home, but occasionally I'll go fishing. And my father-in-law told me years ago, he said, fish are perverse creatures, and boy, they are. It's hard to predict when a fish is going to bite and when a fish is going to catch a fish. And so Peter goes and casts a line and he catches a fish. Yeah, this is a miracle. That's what it is. And the fish just happens to have this coin in its mouth. The temple tax is a completely different animal than what we usually think about. We study the New Testament, we study the Gospels, we read about taxes and tax collectors, okay? Because most of the taxes that we read about are going to the Roman government. This is a special tax that's collected by the Jews, for the temple. And in the text box on last week's handout, you may have noticed, was a section from Leviticus where it says this is every male over the age of 19, 20 and up, this is called a head tax. So it doesn't matter how much money you make, Jason. You know, I can be pulling down $1 million a year, you can be pulling down 10,000 a year. We both got to pay the same amount because it's an atonement. You're saying, thank you, God, I'm your slave, and I'm gonna pay for my keep for this year. And so you pay this half shekel. And so the deal is the Jews don't make coins anymore. They don't have their own government, so they can't make coins. So a half shekel is equal to 2 drachmas, or vice versa. 2 drachmas equal half a shekel. So that's why we have this 4 drachma coin. Now, a really funny thing about this, you can get into this coin thing a good bit. And coins are one of the things from the ancient world that have survived. And so we find their old coins. And this coin had pictures of a pagan god on it, Hercules. And a picture on the other side of an eagle on a ship. And it was it's supposed to be like ancient Tyre or something. The holy city, Tyre. It was very pagan. But the Jews, you had to use this coin to collect it. And so people, so what's this thing about collecting this picture, this graven image of a pagan god to support the temple? Well, if you need the money, you need the money. So that's what they did. At any rate, interesting conversation here between Jesus and Peter. Peter says right off the bat, he says, sure, he pays his taxes. Why, he's practically perfect, He's the Son of God. Of course he pays his taxes. What a question. And Jesus calls him and he says, they're in Capernaum, by the way, which is up there, still in this Galilean ministry, about to leave on that last trip to Jerusalem, but they're still living in the house, it says. So they've got a house they're staying in. So Jesus says, Peter, what do you think? If we're children of the King, do we have to pay taxes? A different way of thinking, because, and I'm not making a political statement here, but for all 4 years of the Trump presidency, the question was in the news media, why doesn't he release his tax returns? Okay? So we expect the president and the president's children and the president's family to pay taxes. But that's not the way it is when you have a king. When you have a king, the king doesn't pay taxes, and his sons don't pay taxes, and so, because they're the king, like paying yourself. They own everything. So, and so he says, well, he said, no, you don't have to. Then the children are exempt. It's Jesus in verse 26. something very interesting he says here. He says, so that we may not cause offense, you go get this fish and pay the taxes for you and for me. So that we may not cause offense. Now, think a bit about what you've seen about Jesus already in this book of Matthew. Does this phrase surprise you? Jason, does it surprise you any?
Well, I mean, yeah, you wouldn't really say Jesus worried much about causing offense so much as he did worry about doing what he should do.
Yeah, Jesus has offended plenty of people. In fact, one time, he got on a kind of a rant, and his disciples came to him and said, you offended the Pharisees when you said that, And he says, and he unleashes kind of, rant 2.0, So this is kind of interesting, but maybe what we're seeing here is that Jesus doesn't just cause offense because he likes to upset people. And so an issue like this, we would say in our daily lives, this is not worth going to war over. This is not worth offending somebody about. Let's go ahead and pay the tax. Even though, Peter, I don't have to do that because I'm Son of God, but we're going to do it anyway in order to get along with people. And this whole concept is a reference on your sheet here. 1 Corinthians 9, 19 through 23. Can anybody, I don't think there's probably many of you that know that by memory, but this business about not giving offense, can you guess what this section is in the writings of Paul? Paul said, talking about trying to relate to people outside the body, or even some inside the body in his case, he said, I have become all things to all men. To the Jews, I become like a Jew. To the Gentiles, I become like a Gentile. And it's so different from the modern way that we communicate so often. We call it in your face. In your face. And I think this is kind of the social media milieu we're in, that, if you don't like it, you can lump it. Here's mine. I'm going to own you. I'm going to flame you. I'm going to put you down. I'm going to insult you. And Jesus says, Peter, let's not insult people if we don't have to. Let's just pay the tax and move on with it. Now, so that's what I think we can learn from this little episode about the fish. But I think it's a nice segue to where we're going next. And so I want to just read that, and then I'll try to tie these things together. Let's read chapter 18, 1 through 4, okay? And Jason, since you're in the back, I'm just going to pick on you and say you read that first, okay?
Yep. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus, saying, Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And calling to him a child, he put him in the midst of them and said, Truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so the title of today's lesson is Pay Me What You Owe Me. That's taken from the parable that's in the last part of the chapter. But if we had to give it another title, I think we might call it, if we had to change it, we might call it The Path to Greatness. Now, there's an assumption behind the question that the disciples asked. And what is their assumption? May, what is their assumption when they say, who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? What assumption are they making?
I think if you have the good like social status or something, you will be the great.
Yeah, because what do they think about this kingdom? What do they think about this kingdom? Jim, what are they assuming about the kingdom?
I think the kingdom is like the king. You have king, you have someone under the king, and then different levels.
May, that's a great answer. But since your name is not Jim, I'm going to go back over here and say, Jim, what were you about to say?
I was going to say it's their view of the kingdom was very similar to what they already had in place, and that is, there's the boss, and then there's the subordinates, but the subordinates have a priority relationship, and that affects Peter later in his concept with Jesus, that he gets a little bit annoyed when he sees he is really not number one of Jesus' disciples, even though technically he probably is, for the way Jesus relates to him. That's what I don't know.
Yeah, in a human organization, we think about the org chart, okay, even today.
Yeah.
Back then, so much more so. And it's shaped like a pyramid, right? You got somebody on top. And the closer you are to the top, well, it's an honor. It's prestige. It's power. And so, we want to be great in the kingdom. So what do we have to do? I was kind of bad when I was in school, Matthias. I was really bad. I didn't really care what they had to teach me. I wanted to know what I have to do to make an A in this class. And I wasn't a very good employee, Jason, when I worked for the government, because what I want to know is what I have to do to get promoted. Just tell me. I'll do it. I'll do it. Just tell me, okay? Because I want to get promoted. And Jesus says, well, if you really want to be great, go back and read the Sermon on the Mount. It says, blessed are the what? The very first beatitude, the what? The poor in spirit inherit the kingdom. It's not the people that are pushing and shoving to get to the top. It's the poor in spirit. So he's trying to get this across, and it's hard to get it across to them, and it's really hard to get across to us, but he uses a great visual aid, and his visual aid is what, Matthias? It's not PowerPoint, it's what?
He figures out the intention of the question.
What does it say?
He says a child.
It's a little child. He says a child. Now, then he says something that's astounding. He said, unless you change, already he says, you guys don't have it right, you got to change. Unless you change and become like little children, you will never what? Enter the kingdom. Not get greatness. You won't even get on the back row. Woo! Boy, that's something, isn't it? Now, those of us who have raised little children, and of course a lot of that's way in the background for some of us, we can't remember, but some of us like Jason, they deal with this every day. You think, well, I don't think this childish behavior is really exactly what Jesus had in mind, is it? I mean, because they get to be pretty somebody said, I didn't believe in original sin until I had kids. Now, they can be pretty bad sometimes, pretty selfish, pretty fussy, pretty, whatever. But it's the humility that I think he's focusing on here, and the sense of utter dependence on the parent, on the caregiver, that is what Jesus is commending them for. So greatness in the kingdom, and then what we have here, it's funny, the way we like to see a material that's written out is like we have here in our Bible. We have these nice bold font headings, and the headings explain something about what follows, right? That's the way we do things. Like on your handout sheet today, that's the title, and everything under this is supposed to tie to that title some kind of way. Not so much in the book of Matthew and some of the other scriptures. Instead, I told you that in the book of Matthew we have 5 great speeches or discourses. And the way we know we've read a speech or a discourse is when we get down to the bottom. Look over at chapter 19, verse 1. Jim, would you read 19:1 for us?
And it came about that when Jesus had finished these words, he departed from Galilee and came into the region of Judea beyond Jordan.
Okay, so what we find is this phrase, when Jesus had finished. And we see this at the end of the Sermon on the Mount in 7:28. At the end of chapter 10, 11 verse 1. At the end of chapter 13 and 13:53, and now we see it again in chapter 19 and verse 1, when Jesus had finished these sayings. Okay, so I've already told you this is the end of the Sermon on the Mount. Does anybody remember what chapter 10 is all about? His second great speech, his second great lecture. Think so? What is chapter 10 about? Don't remember that one? This is the cost of discipleship. Chapter 13, Matthias, do you remember that one? Yes, parables about the kingdom. Parables about the kingdom. And so now, chapter 18, what is chapter 18 all about? I've already said, well, maybe call it the path to greatness. And it is the path to greatness, but what he's going to deal with here is relationships between disciples. And only 3 places in the gospel we use the word church. Chapter 16, Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus, upon this rock I will build my church. That's one. The other 2 are in this chapter, okay? So it's relationships within the body, within the church, among disciples. Okay, so let's just read the next little bit here, okay? If I should have had Jason read 1 through 5, I'm sorry. But let's just start in verse 6 and read all the way through verse 14, okay? 6 through 14. And Matthias, I believe it's your turn to read. So if you'll read 6 through 14.
If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, stumble, it will be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. Woe to the world because of these things that cause people to stumble. Such things must come, but woe the person through whom they come. If your hand or your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life maimed or crippled than to have 2 hands or 2 feet and to be thrown into the eternal fire. And if your eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life with 1 eye than have 2 eyes and be thrown into the fire of hell. 10. See that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I tell you that the angels in heaven always see the face of my Father, and you that the angels in heaven always see the face of my Father in heaven. What do you think? If a man owns 100 sheep, and one of them wanders away, will he not leave the 99 on the hills and go to look for the one that wandered off? And if he finds it, truly I tell you, he is happier about that one sheep than about the 99 that did not wander off. In the same way, your Father in heaven is not willing that any of these little ones should perish.
Okay, so here is an important point that when Jesus calls the little child and puts him in the midst and says, you've got to become like this little child, and then he starts talking about, about children and little ones, and we kind of get the impression he's kind of like a politician. In our country, in our system, we expect politicians to go around and shake hands with lots of people And if people like the politician, they will bring their little child to meet the politician or to hold the baby. And so we say that when a politician is running for office, they kiss babies. Now, maybe now that we have a COVID pandemic, and maybe, after the pandemic's over, we won't want any strange guy kissing our baby. But it's been a big thing in our culture for a long time, kissing babies. And so we kind of get the idea that Jesus loves children. We sing a song, Jesus loves little children. And maybe he's just kissing babies. But get this. He does love children, okay? But he's not talking about children. He's talking about his disciples. And the 2011 NIV, most of the changes they've made in the English text, I don't like too much, but this one I do. They clarify this in their translation of verse 6. If anyone causes one of these little ones, hyphen, or dash, those who believe in me, dash, to stumble, and so forth and so on. So the little ones that Jesus is talking about are disciples. We've seen this earlier, this kind of language earlier in the book of Matthew, that Jesus has kind of a paternalistic attitude. We talked about him having compassion on the sick and the suffering and the multitudes. They're like sheep without a shepherd. He called the man that was brought by friends, a paralytic, they called him son. The woman with the flow of blood, he called her daughter. He has a protective, paternalistic approach to so many times to people. And so we see that here. He says, it would be better for this person to be drowned in the depths of the sea. Now, it's pretty, I used to read this and just terrify me, the idea of having this big, heavy weight around your neck and throw you in the sea. It's worse than that, okay? Because the sea is the locus of all sorts of evil in the Jewish mind. I mean, when Jonah wanted to get away from God, where'd he go? Got on a boat and went across the sea, right? And so many times, when we read the book of Revelation, there's no longer any sea. We know what that means, So it's you're going to be placed in the depths of evil if you cause this little one to sin. And then this next part is astounding about cutting off your hand and or plucking out your eye. We've read this before. Jesus gets onto this before. Where have we read this before? Does anybody remember? It's on your sheet, I think. Yeah. This is number 11 on the first page. Where have we read this before? It's chapter 5, but what is that? All at once?
That's the beginning of the sermon.
Yeah, Sermon on the Mount, exactly right. Chapter 5, 6, and 7. So this is part of the Sermon on the Mount. I got to thinking about this, and I got to thinking about this week, and I thought about this. This man's story was made into a movie called 127 Hours. It's a true story. How many people have seen the movie? Nobody. I'm going to see. I haven't seen it either. I'm going to see it though. Do you remember this, Jason? Matthias, have you heard of this guy, Aaron Lee Ralston?
Yes, really.
Okay. This is true. This guy was out on a remote area in the West. He didn't tell anybody where he was going. He didn't tell anybody he was supposed to be back. And he was climbing in a narrow canyon, and this big boulder rolled down and trapped his arm. So for 5 days, he did everything he could to pull his arm out. He couldn't. So he realized he was having hallucinations. He had run out of water, no food. So he got out a dull pocket knife and cut off his arm. He realized that this is what I'm going to have to do. Made a tourniquet so he wouldn't bleed to death.
So difficult to do.
What'd you say?
It's been so difficult to do. Cut that arm off with the bone with that duck.
Oh, that's not all of it, because it was a dull pocket knife, so he couldn't cut through the bone. He had to break the bones off.
Oh, okay.
He had to break the bones off to get his arm out of there. But he did it. He did it. And he survived to do many other things in his life. That was a long time ago, 2003. But you see what he did here. He lived because he was willing to cut his arm off. And, you know, it's an astounding story, and Jesus' teaching at face value is astounding. Now, let's get clear here on this. He's not talking about self-mutilation, okay? Your hand or your foot are really not going to be the cause of sin. The cause of sin is right here between your ears. That's the cause of sin. But what he's saying is, if you have a relationship, if you have a job, if you have a hobby, if you have an addiction that's going to keep you out of heaven, even if it hurts as much as cutting off your arm or your hand or your foot, then do it. Then do it. And again, here in Matthew, we encounter this concept of eternal reward and punishment, which, frankly, we don't talk about much in church anymore, but Jesus talked about it an awful lot. So, how does this tie into this overall theme of the path to greatness and also caring for the little ones? And what he's saying here is, I want my little ones to make it to heaven. And so, it's a take no prisoners attitude. We don't want to cause them to sin. We don't want you to sin. I want you to make it to heaven, to be with me. And then he gets into this parable of wandering sheep. Now, we could spend, maybe sometimes we'll even have a whole class about the metaphor, the simile, the figure of the shepherd throughout the Bible. You know, Psalm 23, so forth and so on. John chapter 10, many. But here, it's the shepherd, and this guy does something that's a little bit irrational. What does the shepherd do that doesn't make good sense, really? Jim, what does he do that doesn't really make good sense?
In the story?
He what?
In the story, what?
Yeah, the shepherd in the story. What does he do that doesn't really make good sense?
He leaves the 99.
He leaves the 99. Now, we do things like this ourselves. You know, I bet in your drawer at home, you have plenty of socks. But if you lose that one pair of Ole Miss socks, Jim, that you really like a lot, it just ruins your whole day. You look everywhere. What are those socks? Let them in the dryer, maybe something. Whatever are the socks? I've got to find my socks. Oh, listen, who cares? You got other socks. But these are the socks I want, you know. The ones that I don't have are the ones that you can't find are the ones you want the most, right? And so he leaves the 99. He goes and finds that one sheep. What a beautiful teaching on the importance of the individual. Now, quick contrast. Contrast between the disciple who's asking a question, what do I have to do to be the greatest? Okay? Because I want to be up there at the top of the pyramid. And the seeking, searching shepherd. You know, this is somebody says upside down kingdom, you know. It's a concern, it's about this lost sheep. It's not a concern about me being the greatest. And what I'm going to say is a little bit dumb. You know, I don't think that anybody in this class would really need to hear this, but I have to say this comes to feel deeply about. You know, sometimes I think people have an idea that if you become an elder in the Lord's church, it's kind of like getting up near the top of the pyramid. It's really a good thing. And, you know, they're kind of like these disciples in the first part of this chapter. You know, they're going to be the deciders. They're going to call the shots, you know. And I think the really scriptural viewpoint is not like that at all. It's not like that at all. You just get a bigger shovel, okay? You just have to dig harder and faster. That's basically what it's all about. It's about washing dirty feet. And it's about going after sheep. And some of these sheep, they wander off. They're so stupid, and they do stupid things to themselves. And, you know, you have to get in there in their messy lives and their filthy, dirty feet and try to help them out. And sometimes they don't want to be helped. And it's you know, that's what it's like, you know, these sheep. So anyway, Then we have this section on dealing with sin in the church, which is kind of the way you deal with these sheep that wander off. Before we do that, though, I think it's really interesting the word in the original about causing people to sin. Verse 6, cause one of these little ones to sin. And then it talks about your hand and foot causing you to stumble, causing you to sin. And so this Greek word that's for causing to sin is this word right here. And I think I'm going to spell it right. So what English word do you think is related to this causing to sin?
Scandal.
Scandal, right. Yeah, we'll take the K out and put in a C, and then it's pretty obvious that this is the root for our English word, scandal. So we say that somebody's scandalized when they hear something that's terrible, moral failure in another person, scandalize them. Okay, so now we're ready to move on into dealing with sin in the church, and Jesus gives a 4-step process. Let's see, Jim, would you read this, please? It will be verses 15 through, where does it go through? 15 through 20.
And if your brother sins, go and reprove him in private. If he listens to you, you won your brother. Step 1.
Okay.
Step 1.
Yeah, right, step 1.
But if he does not listen to you, take 1 or 2 more with you, so that by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every fact may be confirmed. That's step number 2.
Okay. All right.
If he refuses to listen to that group, tell it to the church. Step number 3. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile in the tax gatherer. Step 4. Truly I say to you, whatever you shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall have been loosed in heaven.
Okay.
Again, I say to you that if 2 of you agree on earth about anything that they may ask, it shall be done for them, my Father who is in heaven. For where 2 or 3 have gathered together in my name, there I am in their midst.
Okay. Now, this is very challenging when we attempt to apply it to our lives today. That doesn't excuse us from trying, but having tried, I can tell you it's not simple, it's not easy, particularly if you have to go beyond step 1. But step 1, again, this is my experience, maybe different. About 90% of the time, step 1 is sufficient. Step 1 is sufficient. It says here, if your brother sins, then you go and talk to him. And some translations add some of the original manuscripts include the words, if your brother or sister sins against you. I think this is probably more accurate here. It just says if he sins or she sins. And notice here that it doesn't suggest that you send them an email. It doesn't suggest that you send them a text or even write them a letter. Sometimes written communication is better and is necessary, but what's suggested here, what's commanded here, is a face-to-face meeting, one-on-one. Now, the natural urge, it's almost like the urge to breathe air or drink water. If I know, if I learn that Jason is doing something really wrong, instead of talking to Jason about it, what I want to do is talk to Matthias about it, Jason. Okay? that is the urge that we've got, is to go talk, not to Jason, but to somebody else. And there may be a time to do that in confidence to get advice. I'm not saying it's always wrong to talk to a third party, but it's just awfully easy to get on that track, okay? But it says to talk to this person face to face, okay? Now again, we're talking about relationships within the kingdom, relationships between disciples. We're talking about taking care of these lost sheep and these little ones. And so the object of this conversation is what? Why do we want to confront this person?
Change. You want actions change.
We want them to change so that they will still be our brother or sister. We're not trying to put them down. We're not trying to shame them. We're not trying to make ourselves feel better. We're trying to keep them where they will make it to heaven with us. That's the whole idea. That's the whole idea. So again, it says in, I believe, Galatians 6:1, that we should restore such a one gently. If someone is overtaken in a trespass, we should restore such a one gently, lest we also be tempted. So this is the idea here, is the restoration. And so I've listed 1, 2, 3, 4 here. It might be better, I don't have time to do this, to put this in a flow chart, okay? Because at every step, there's a contingency. So let's assume that the person does not listen. If they do listen, stop, okay? But if the person does not listen, it says go again to see them face to face and take 2 or 3 other Christians along with you. And if they still refuse to listen, then tell it to the church. Now it's implied here that you don't just announce to the church, so-and-so is living a sinful life and we want you to know about it, but that the church will engage in prayer and face-to-face visits and all sorts of communication and outreach to this person.
Much like 1 Corinthians 7, where the person in error is known to the church, and the church separates themselves from him.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's like tying it around your neck and throwing into the sea.
Well, that doesn't happen though right here. It happens right here. The church doesn't separate until there's a refusal to listen, even to change.
Well, that was implied.
So there's outreach here. There's outreach with the 2 or 3. There's outreach by. So.
And with the two or three, Jesus is playing on the Jewish system of having to have 2 or 3 witnesses to bear truth. That's what happens to Jesus and his tribe.
So if you're from the Jewish mindset, and I arrive at your house, May, with 2 or 3, you realize that I'm really serious. Because now I've got 2 or 3 witnesses. Okay, so this is serious business. Okay, so, but he says, let it be to you, if you want to listen to the church, then let it be like a Gentile, or is it a tax collector? A pagan or a tax collector, excuse me. Now, early in the history of this country, we're going to end on this today. We'll get into the parable of the pay you what you owe me next week. But early in the history of this country, there were a lot of people that came from England called the Puritans. And they established a colony up around modern-day Boston, okay? They came after the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims were a very small group, and they were just a little different from the Puritans. And the Puritans came in, and the reason they were called Puritans is they wanted to purify a very corrupt Anglican Episcopal church that was the state church of England. They thought if we could get all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, then we could establish a godly colony, a city set on a shining hill. That's what they wanted to do. And they wanted to have what we would call a theocracy. That church law and civil law would be the same thing. And so, if you didn't show up at church on Sunday, the sheriff would come and knock on your door. And you would be told, you better be there next week, and by the way, you owe $5 as a fine for you didn't come this week, okay? I mean, it was that way, okay? Now, they practiced this four-step approach. But if you got down to step 4, treat them as a pagan and a tax collector, that meant that you were expelled from the colony. Now, that doesn't mean you just go down the coast a little ways and move into another village. That meant you're out there in the cold with the wolves and the Indians, all right? It's practically a death sentence, all right? Because we're talking about you're on the edge of the North American wilderness, all right? There's not a lot of other places to go.
Exile.
So it's really a tough thing if you get to step 4 with the Puritans. So I'm thinking, is that really what Jesus meant? He said, let them be like a pagan and a tax collector. Now, to the Jews, it would be. You're cut out, so you're outside the community. No intercourse with you, no business with you. We stop going to your shop, we stop buying your stuff. We don't marry your daughter, you don't marry our son. It's just, you're cut off. But to us as Christians, what do we do with pagans and tax collectors? Well, they're unconverted. They're unconverted. They're people that need to be evangelized. They're not in our fellowship. We sure would like to make them in our fellowship. We'd like to reach out to them. We'd like to change them. So maybe I'm wrong with that emphasis, but I'm thinking that may be more what we ought to do. The way we ought to think about this is, yes, they're outside of our fellowship, but we still see them as a target for evangelism and not just as a persona non grata that we want to throw out. So you've been very patient. I'm looking forward to a time pretty soon where we won't have to wear masks in our class. And we will continue with this great parable next week about the unforgiving servant. So thank you very much for being a part of our class today.